Skyrim has been so thoroughly dissected and analyzed that it's essentially its own genre at this point. Its systems broken down and rebuilt into entirely new games even, and if you ask somebody Imperial or Stormcloak, you can easily get into an hour-long discussion. But there's at least one stone unturned that I've wanted to dig up for a while. Wolves. Because there are no wolves in Skyrim. I know what you're thinking, but bear with me, because these guys behave nothing like these guys, not even in a video gamey limitation sort of way. According to the fandom wiki, Skyrim wolves don't attack the Dragonborn unless they draw near, and contrary to popular belief on the internet, this is true. Partially. Skyrim wolves, like all Skyrim enemies, do obey a detection radius and an alert state. So it is in fact possible to avoid some confrontations with wolves. End of story, right? Well, of course not, I wouldn't be making this video if that were the case. This isn't the full story. Wolves ambush the player, for example. Skyrim bears don't hunt you down to the ends of the earth unless you really bother them. So let's get into it. There are three kinds of Skyrim wolves: the wolf, the ice wolf, and the pit wolf. The wolf is our standard grey-furred menace. The ice wolf is a stronger white-furred variant, and the pit wolf can look like either. Side note, werewolves do fit into this, and we'll discuss them later on. But real quick, actually, let's do a quiz. What do you think is the deadliest non-human mammal in the United States? So not other people or things like mosquitoes or bacteria. Got your guess? Okay. If you said wolf, you're wrong. If you said deer, you're correct. Maybe that's surprising, or maybe not, but here's the thing. Wolves are nowhere near the top of that list. Now, this doesn't mean you should befriend wild animals, but wolves really aren't a threat the way Skyrim wolves are, or how any video game or movie depicts them. Deer kill approximately 200 people per year. Obviously because of car-related incidents, but wolves, they kill less than one person per year. In our world, wolf attacks are typically split into three categories. Predatory, sometimes called unprovoked, where the wolf is either investigating prey or actually attempting to eat prey, meaning you. Defensive, where the wolf is being provoked, like if a hunter is going after the pups. And rabid, where the wolf is aggressive because of the rabies virus. Between the years of 2002 and 2020, there were 489 documented wolf attacks worldwide. Now that's actually far less than I initially thought. And of those 489, only 26 were fatal. 67 were predatory, 42 were defensive, and 380 were rabid. This begs the question, where do Skyrim's wolf attacks fall? When walking between any two towns of Skyrim, you'll at some point hear a howl, the signal that a wolf attack is imminent. Not in our world though, howls are mostly used to communicate over long distances. But in Skyrim, it means out of nowhere the Dragonborn is ambushed. In fact, it can happen multiple times in a row. Unprovoked attack, so seems pretty predatory, right? But does that make any sense? Wolves are intelligent with complex social structures. Like I mentioned, howls are a way to communicate and locate pack members. They also communicate with barks and body language. Wolves even mate for life, raising their cubs together. So why would these creatures with self-preservation go after a Skyrim traveler who could just start flinging fireballs at them? Why risk it when they could just hunt a deer or a rabbit or a mudcrab? Well, maybe there's just not enough prey. There are lots of stories throughout history about how wars have caused major habitat disruption and prey scarcity, and with this added pressure, wolves turn to scavenging battlefields, putting them in close proximity to humans and thus increasing the rate of confrontation. And would you look at that, Skyrim has been plunged into a civil war. So do we see major habitat disruption, animal displacement, and battlefield scavenging? No, none of that. Skyrim is teeming with prey, so much so that you see twice as many deer as you do wolves when traveling between Riverwood and Whiterun. And Skyrim wolves, simply put, never scavenge, we only see them as aggressors. Historically, clashes with wolves often happened because of livestock. If you put a bunch of tasty farm animals in one area, predators are going to get an easy meal. In Skyrim, wolves don't attack farms, but they do attack your Hearthfire homestead. American colonizers sometimes encountered similar events during westward expansion. And it makes sense, people encroaching on land that was previously managed by indigenous peoples, it's a major disruption of the ecological balance that existed. So are all of these attacks defensive? Some of them could be, like I said before, you can actually skirt around an alerted wolf to avoid aggression. Or for instance like at Falder's Tooth, where wolves have been caged for pit fights. Defensive behavior is understandable here. How long can you cage something before it lashes out? But on the whole, the aforementioned ambush strategy disqualifies defensive behavior for the majority of wolf attacks. We do see hunting camps in Skyrim, so maybe it's possible that the fur trade has put so much pressure on the environment that wolves are constantly acting defensively. Like here, west of Helgen, for instance, where a wolf has taken the lives of 2 men. They clearly were in their camp when the wolf attacked, so this would not be defensive behavior. But wolves in our world behave nothing like this. For example, in the past, several places gave bounties for killing wolves. Now, Skyrim has bounties for bandits and giants, but not wolves. These are just the places with bounties. There were more with specific extermination programs. It's estimated that 100,000 wolves were killed every year on the North American continent from 1870 to 1877. In 1905, wolves were trapped, injected with sarcoptic mange, and released into the wild to spread the disease. And around 1914, 3.5 million strychnine baits were spread across the western half of the United States. It was absolute chemical and biological destruction funded by the American taxpayer at the behest of big cattle. Not that big cattle. And Europe has its own history of war on wolves. Something I always kind of find funny is the prevalence of wolf symbology, even though they've been nearly eradicated from the planet. They're everywhere, sports teams, logo designs, and don't even get me started on the alpha wolf myth. L. David Meach, the original researcher who came up with that theory, has spent years debunking it. Yeah, alpha wolves just don't exist. Anyway, in the wake of this destruction, did wolves enact guerrilla warfare like they do in Skyrim? No. They hid, nearly driven to extinction. And side note, this actually explains something else in our world. The danger of the deer. In ecology, wolves are a keystone species, meaning if you take them out, then the whole system will suffer drastically. Now fast forward to today, and the deer populations have exploded since there's no natural control. But as I was saying, that leads us to our final contender, rabidity. Rabid animals typically aren't fearful, and neither are Skyrim wolves. So this seems like the obvious answer at this point, especially considering its prevalence in our world's wolf attacks. 78% of them, actually. Rabies is transmitted by biting, something Skyrim wolves do a lot of. So do their bites even transmit disease? Actually, they do. On survival mode, if the Dragonborn gets bit by a wolf, they can develop rock joint. Skyrim's version of tetanus. So Skyrim's wolves don't transmit rabies. They don't have rabies. Well, maybe having to rush to an alchemist to administer a vaccine all while suffering debilitating symptoms just wouldn't be a fun mechanic, so it's left out for gameplay purposes. But here's the thing, Skyrim's wolves don't show any signs of rabidity. No hydrophobia, no seizing, no paralysis. So what on Nirn could be causing these rampant wolf attacks? Which leads us finally to lycanthropy. Here's seen as the Daedric Prince of the Hunt, the father of man-beasts. In fact, lycanthropy is commonly called Hircine's gift, or curse depending on who you ask. Oftentimes, the motives of the Daedra are obscure, but Hircine cares about one thing above all else: the hunt. Not even the kill, just the act of hunting. The skill and the competition of it, he even refers to it as the greatest game. Carriers of lycanthropy are destined to go to his realm of oblivion, the hunting grounds, after death to partake in perpetual hunts. He's populated this place with creatures whose hunting prowess he admires, various lycanthropes, daedra, bears, and wolves. And in the Elder Scrolls Online, we're met with this description of wild hunt wolves. Some say that Hircine meddled with the nature of wolves in a way that made them susceptible to shapeshifting, and from this Daedric interference came both the werewolf and the wild hunt wolf. Meddled with the nature of wolves. You heard that right, this Daedric prince can manipulate the creatures of the wild. And we've seen what Hircine's meddling can do with characters like Sinding. He's a carrier of Hircine's curse, destined to go to his hunting grounds. It's lycanthropy that drove Sinding to murder. So we know that Skyrim wolf attacks aren't motivated by rabidity, defensive behavior, or even predation. And we know that Hircine can meddle with the nature of creatures, and we've seen what his interference can drive people to do. So if you ask me, it looks like Hircine saw the two greatest hunters on Nirn, humanoids and wolves, and since he's unable to control the nature of man, instead having to resort to individual pacts and deals, he simply exerted his influence over wolves instead. At first, maybe this seems uncharacteristic for somebody like Hircine to do, but hear me out. He's in it for the love of the game being the hunt. You know Sheogorath? Hircine is only slightly less crazy than that, a partier that loves the chase. So he altered the very nature of Skyrim wolves, changing them into unrealistic monsters we know them as, the fabled villains that media lies to us about, perpetually challenging the Dragonborn in the Great Game. Skyrim, as well as other games, do provide opportunities to disengage from this violence. For instance, in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you can just punch wolves out until they're unconscious, or beat enough of them that the rest run away. Red Dead Redemption 2 also shares this runaway feature, but realistically, wolves were nearly extinct in 1899, so that's a whole other rabbit hole. This could be why spells and abilities like Calm, Voice of the Sky, and Kind's Peace are temporary. They don't fundamentally alter the nature of Skyrim wolves like Hircine did. After the effect wears off, they resort back to their Daedra-determined default. Now, there's no specific lore that confirms this theory, it really is just headcanon. But if you ask me, it's pretty cool and even plausible. And isn't that what makes Elder Scrolls so rich? The inquiries of the community and the absolute madness of the lore? This video was inspired in part by this mod, Animals Are Not Monsters by Valexia, so I know I'm not the only one that's thought about this. I think there's an opportunity for metatextual analysis here. I didn't make this video to say that wolves are harmless or anything like that, although they're absolutely important. I made it because reality is reflected in art. Wolves are wild animals, and that's a good thing. But in Skyrim, they're just something completely different, and I think that's pretty interesting. But if you're like me, you still spam Kind's Peace when encountering them. Kind is the ancient Nord name for the divine Kynareth, goddess of the heavens, the winds, the sea, the elements, and the unseen spirits of the air. In the Elder Scrolls, the 9 divines give 10 commands. This is Kynareth's. Use nature's gifts wisely, respect her power, and fear her fury. Which reflects this sentiment better? Managed reintroduction, or continued eradication? There's a contrast between Kynareth and Hircine. One represents balance with and respect for nature. The other, admiration, but also domination. I think it's important to ask ourselves, with which do we align? And as always, thanks for watching. Oh man, I really appreciate everybody who watched my first video essay, and even more thanks to anybody who commented and subscribed. I genuinely just thought that it would float out into the digital void. Asher, Cody, Namai, Sir Winebottle, Prenux Calamity, these are just some of the commenters, but all of you had very kind things to say. Every word of gratitude that I express says far less than I wanted to. I'm still getting used to recording my voice, and I'm learning better how to manage audio, so thanks for tolerating that. There shouldn't be any background buzz in this video now, but man, I've thought about Skyrim wolves for years at this point, and I really wanted to get these thoughts out. Also, there's a bunch of sources down in the description that I used while researching for this video. I almost turned it into a massive deep dive into depictions of wolves and their place in media in general, but I only really thought of it toward the end of finishing the script and recording and everything, and I didn't want to turn it into some weird homunculus video that didn't make sense. But if you're interested in that, let me know, and maybe I'll make it eventually. The next video I'm probably going to do will be on the endangered species of Red Dead. So that's just a little bit of foresight into what's sprouting in the Thought Garden. And again, as always, thanks for watching.